There is a psychological phenomenon that most people never become aware of, and it is quietly controlling everything. The way you react when someone raises their voice, the way you shrink in certain rooms, the way love makes you anxious instead of safe, the way you self-sabotage right at the edge of something good. None of that is random. None of that is personality. None of that is just who you are. It is a program. A deeply embedded psychological program that was written before you were old enough to question it, before you had words for what you were feeling, before you understood that the environment you were raised in was shaping the lens through which you would see everything, including yourself. Psychologists call it the wounded inner child. But strip away the soft language, and what you are actually looking at is this: a set of conclusions your nervous system made in childhood about safety, about love, about whether you are enough, about whether the world is a place that welcomes you or a place you have to earn your way through. And those conclusions did not stay in childhood. They traveled with you. They are sitting inside your body right now, influencing your thoughts, shaping your reactions, quietly deciding what you reach for and what you pull away from. The child you were does not disappear when you grow up. It goes underground, into the subconscious, into the part of you that operates below logic, below intention, below every conscious decision you try to make. And from there, it runs the show. Think about the last time you reacted in a way that surprised even you, the anger that came too fast, the tears that came from nowhere, the sudden need to withdraw, to shut down, to go silent. That was not your adult self responding. That was something older, something younger, something that learned a long time ago that this particular feeling means danger. And danger means protect yourself, even if there is no danger. Even if the person in front of you is not the person from your past, even if the situation is completely different. The subconscious does not distinguish between then and now. It only recognizes the feeling, and the feeling triggers the program. This is why you can understand something completely and still not change. You can read every book. You can know exactly why you behave the way you do. You can trace it back, name it, explain it to someone else with perfect clarity. And still, walk straight back into the pattern, because understanding lives in the conscious mind, and the program lives somewhere else. It lives in the part of you that was shaped before understanding was even possible, before you could think your way through an experience. Before you had any framework at all, you were just a child in an environment, taking everything in, deciding what it meant, and those meanings became your map, the map you have been navigating with ever since. Not the map of reality, the map of your earliest experiences of reality. And here is where it gets psychologically important. The mind does not hold on to these wounds as memories alone. It holds them as identity. It fuses them into your self-concept, so it no longer feels like something that happened to you. It feels like something that is true about you. The child who was not heard enough does not grow up thinking, I was in an environment where I was not listened to. They grow up feeling, I am someone who does not matter enough to be heard. The child who was loved inconsistently does not think, the adults around me were struggling. They feel, I am someone who has to earn love. I am someone who is never fully safe receiving it. Do you see the shift? From experience to identity, from something that happened to something you believe yourself to be. That is the wound, not the event itself, but what the event taught you about who you are. And that belief has been quietly filtering your entire life. Every relationship, every opportunity, every moment where you stood at the edge of something real and something inside you said, you are not safe here. You are not enough for this. Pull back, protect yourself. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is an old wound speaking in the language of instinct. And until you understand that, until you go beneath the surface and actually look at what is running, underneath your adult choices, you will keep living a life that was designed by a version of you that no longer exists. A version of you that was doing the best it could, with nothing, no tools, no context, no one to explain what was happening, just a child, making sense of a world it did not yet understand, and writing conclusions that were never meant to last a lifetime. And here is what makes this so difficult to see from the inside. The program does not announce itself. It does not tap you on the shoulder and say, this reaction is coming from a younger version of you who was never made to feel safe. It just fires, instantly, automatically. And then your adult mind rushes in afterward to explain it, to justify it, to build a rational story around something that was never rational to begin with. You tell yourself you reacted that way because of what the other person did, because of the circumstances, because you were tired or stressed or pushed too far. And sometimes those things are true on the surface, but underneath them, almost always, there is something older driving the intensity, something that recognized a feeling it has felt before, and responded the way it was trained to respond, before you were old enough to be trained, before you even knew training was happening. This is the psychology of old wounds. They do not live in your memory. They live in your nervous system. They live in your body. In the tightness in your chest when someone goes quiet. In the panic when you feel someone pulling away. In the shutdown that happens when criticism lands. Even gentle criticism. Even well-meaning criticism. Your body remembers what your mind has tried to move past. And it responds accordingly, every single time, without your permission, without your awareness, without any regard for who you have become or how hard you have worked to grow. Because the subconscious mind is not interested in who you are trying to be. It is only interested in keeping you safe from what it once decided was dangerous. And that is the tragedy of unhealed wounds. Not that they make you weak, but that they make you loyal. Loyal to a version of reality that is decades old. Loyal to a story about yourself that was written by someone who had no idea what they were doing. A child trying to survive, trying to make sense of love that was confusing, trying to find safety in an environment that did not always provide it, trying to understand why some days felt warm and other days felt cold, and deciding, in that confusion, that the variable must be them. That they must be the reason, that if they could just be quieter or better or easier or more, maybe the love would stay, maybe the room would feel safer, maybe they would finally be enough. And that decision, that single, silent, subconscious decision, became the foundation of everything. The way you move through relationships, the way you respond to your own needs, the way you treat yourself when you fail, the way you brace for things to fall apart, even when everything is going well. All of it. Rooted in that one moment of a child deciding what they needed to be in order to survive. You are not broken. You are not damaged beyond reach. You are not someone who simply draws bad experiences. You are someone who is still running a program that was written in survival. And survival programs do not care about your happiness. They do not care about your potential. They do not care about the life you are trying to build. They only care about one thing, keeping you away from the feeling that once felt like it would destroy you, even if avoiding that feeling is now the very thing destroying you. That is the paradox of psychological wounds. The protection becomes the prison. The very mechanism that kept you safe as a child is what is keeping you small as an adult. And the first step, the only real first step, is not to fix it. It is to see it, clearly without judgment, without shame. To look at your patterns and instead of asking what is wrong with me, ask something different. Ask what happened to me. Ask what did I decide about myself because of what happened. Ask how old is the part of me that is responding right now. Because when you can ask those questions, something begins to shift, not all at once. Not in a single moment of insight, but slowly, deeply, at the level where the program actually lives. That is where real transformation begins, not on the surface, not in the behavior, but in the belief underneath the behavior, in the identity that was formed before you had any say in the matter, and that is exactly what we are going to move through together. You have spent years trying to change what you do, without ever questioning what you believe, and that is why it has not worked. Not because you are not capable, not because change is not possible for you, but because you have been working at the wrong level. Behavior is not where the pattern lives. Behavior is just the surface, the visible part, the part you can see and measure and criticize yourself for. But underneath every behavior is a belief, and underneath every belief is a feeling, and underneath every feeling is an identity, a deep subconscious sense of who you are, what you deserve, what is safe for you, what is possible for you. And that identity was not chosen by you. It was assigned to you, by your environment, by the people who raised you, by the experiences that happened before you were developed enough to filter them. Before you could look at a painful moment and say, "This is about them, not about me." You could not do that. You were a child, so instead you internalized it. You made it mean something about yourself, and that meaning became your operating system. The invisible software running every visible decision you make. Now here is what psychology has understood for a long time. The subconscious mind is not abstract. It is not some mysterious fog inside you. It is a pattern recognition system, and it is extraordinarily good at its job. It takes in information, it finds patterns, it creates shortcuts, and then it uses those shortcuts to predict what will happen next and prepare you accordingly. In childhood, this system was learning at its fastest rate, taking in enormous amounts of information about the world, about relationships, about safety, about love, about what you need to do or be in order to receive the things you need. And the patterns it found in those early years became hardwired, not permanently, but deeply, deeply enough that decades later they still feel like instinct. Still feel like truth, still feel like just the way things are. When they are not the way things are at all, they are the way things were, in one specific environment, with one specific set of people, during one specific period of your life, and your subconscious generalized that experience into a universal law. That is what children do. They cannot separate the particular from the universal. They cannot say, "This is just my family." Other families are different. They only know what they know, and what they know becomes the world. So if love in your early environment felt unpredictable, your subconscious concluded that love is unpredictable. Not that love was unpredictable in that house with those people during that time. That love itself is unpredictable, and now you carry that conclusion into every relationship you enter. You are always waiting for it to shift, always scanning for the moment the warmth disappears. Always slightly braced, always slightly unavailable, because your subconscious is trying to protect you from a pain it has already catalogued, a pain it does not want you to experience again, and so it keeps you at a distance, keeps you defended, keeps you performing a version of closeness without ever fully arriving in it. And then you wonder why relationships never feel quite safe, why you never fully relax inside them, why part of you always feels like it is waiting for something to go wrong. It is not the relationship, it is the map, the old, outdated, deeply believed map of what love does, or think about the wound of not being enough. The child who was compared, who was praised conditionally, who learned that approval was something you earned through performance, not something you received simply by existing. That child grows into an adult who cannot rest, who constantly needs to be producing, achieving, proving, who feels genuine anxiety in stillness, who ties their entire sense of worth to what they accomplish, and who, no matter how much they achieve, never quite feels like it is enough. Because the wound was never about achievement. The wound was about worth, and achievement cannot heal a wound about worth. You can accomplish everything on your list and still lie awake feeling hollow, because the part of you that does not feel enough is not located in your resume. It is located in a belief that was formed before you had any achievements at all, before you had any way to prove anything to anyone, when you were small and just needed to feel that your existence alone was valuable. And if that was not clearly communicated to you, your subconscious filled in the gap with a conclusion, and that conclusion has been with you every day since, quietly measuring you, quietly finding you lacking, quietly pushing you to do more, be more, prove more. Not because more will ever be enough, but because the wound does not know how to be satisfied. It was never designed to be satisfied. It was designed to protect, to keep you striving so that rejection never catches you off guard, to keep you performing so that love never gets the chance to be withheld, to keep you small enough to feel safe and large enough to feel worthy. All at the same time. That is an exhausting place to live, and most people live there their entire lives, not because they are weak, but because no one ever showed them where the exhaustion was actually coming from. No one ever pointed beneath the behavior to the belief, beneath the belief to the feeling, beneath the feeling to the wound and said, "Look here, this is where it started. This is what you decided about yourself. And this decision has been running your life without your permission. Now here is what changes when you actually see this. Not just intellectually, not just as a concept you nod at and then forget, but when you really see it, when you feel it land in your body as true, something begins to loosen, because the wound only has power when it is invisible, when it operates as instinct rather than as a choice, when you mistake it for who you are rather than recognizing it as what you learned. The moment you separate yourself from the wound, the moment you create even a small amount of distance between you and the program, you begin to have a choice you never had before. Not a perfect choice, not an easy choice, but a choice. And that choice is everything. Because right now, in your current life, there are situations that are triggering these old programs constantly. A conversation that suddenly feels threatening. A moment of silence from someone you care about. A failure that lands heavier than it should. A compliment you cannot receive. A boundary you cannot hold. Each of these moments is not just a moment. It is an invitation from your nervous system back into the old story. Back into the identity of the child who was not safe, not enough, not loved without conditions. And your habitual response is to go there. Because that is what the subconscious does with habits. It takes you there before you even realize you have moved. But here is what begins to happen when the awareness deepens. You start to catch it, not every time, not perfectly, but you start to notice the pull, the familiar feeling of being dragged backward into an old reaction. And in that noticing, even for a fraction of a second, something different becomes possible. You do not have to follow the program. You can pause, you can breathe, you can ask, how old does this feeling feel right now? And when the answer comes back, and it will come back, 8 or 12 or 5, you will understand something profound. The person in front of you is not the threat. The situation around you is not the danger. What is happening is that an old wound has been activated, and it is asking you to respond the way you always have, but you are not who you always were. You are not that child anymore. You have something that child never had. Awareness. And awareness, real awareness, the kind that goes below the surface and touches the actual root, is the beginning of the most important work you will ever do. Not the work of changing what you do. The work of changing what you believe about who you are. Because when the identity shifts, everything shifts. The behavior does not need to be forced. The patterns do not need to be white-knuckled into submission. When you genuinely stop believing the old story about yourself, when you stop seeing yourself through the lens of a wounded child, the patterns that were built to protect that wound simply have nothing left to protect. They lose their grip, slowly, then suddenly, and the life you have been trying to build from the outside finally becomes available from the inside, not because the world changed, because you did, at the level that actually matters, at the level of who you believe yourself to be. You have stayed with this long enough to know something is true, not just intellectually, something deeper than that, something in your body recognized itself in these words, and that recognition is not an accident. It is the first real movement. The first sign that the part of you which has been running the old program is beginning to be seen. And seen things cannot stay hidden. They cannot continue operating in the dark the way they used to. That is the beginning of the shift. But seeing is not enough on its own. Insight without integration is just information, and you have enough information. What you need now is something different. You need a new identity to move into, not a performance of one. Not an affirmation you repeat in the mirror while the wound sits unchanged underneath. An actual shift in the way you hold yourself, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you interpret what happens to you, because the wound did not form through a single event. It formed through repetition, through the daily, constant, relentless repetition of an environment that communicated something about who you were. And healing works the same way, not through one breakthrough moment, through repetition in the opposite direction, through the slow, consistent, patient practice of meeting yourself differently, of responding to your own inner experience with something the child never received. Understanding presence starts safety. Let that land for a moment. The child inside you is not looking for achievement. It is not looking for success or status or external validation. It is looking for what it always looked for: to be seen, to be safe, to be told that it is enough exactly as it is. And for most of your life, you have been trying to give it those things from the outside, through relationships, through accomplishments, through the approval of other people, through building a life impressive enough that the feeling of not being enough might finally go quiet. But it never does, because the outside cannot reach the inside. The approval of 1,000 people cannot touch a wound that lives beneath the level of thought. The only thing that can reach it is you, the adult you, the version of you that exists, right now in this moment, with all the awareness and capacity that the child never had. You are the one who has to go back, not literally, not in a way that reopens pain without purpose, but in the way of turning inward, of becoming a compassionate witness to your own experience, of learning to recognize when the wound is active and choosing consciously to respond to it differently. This is what inner child work actually is at its psychological core. It is not regression. It is not weakness. It is the most mature thing a human being can do. To say, I see the part of me that is still afraid. I see the part of me that is still waiting to be rejected. I see the part of me that learned to make itself small, and I am not going to abandon it the way it was once abandoned. I am going to stay. That decision to stay, to not run from your own inner experience, to not numb it or bypass it or perform your way past it, that is where the actual healing lives. And here is what that looks like in the real moments of your life. When something triggers you, when the old feeling rises, when the familiar pull toward the old pattern begins, instead of following it unconsciously, you pause. You notice. You place your hand on your chest if you need to. You breathe slowly, and you ask, what is this feeling trying to protect me from? What does this part of me believe is about to happen? And then you do something radical. You tell it the truth, not the old truth, the new one. You are safe here. This situation is not what you think it is. You are not that child anymore, and I am not going to let that old story decide what happens next. That might sound simple, and in one sense, it is. But do not mistake simple for easy, because the wound will resist. The subconscious does not release its programs without friction. It will insist that the danger is real. It will flood your body with feeling to convince you. It will replay the old story with remarkable conviction, and your job is not to argue with it, not to suppress it, not to shame yourself for having it. Your job is simply to stay present with it, to hold it the way a calm, loving adult holds a frightened child, without panic, without judgment, with the quiet certainty that this feeling will pass and that you are capable of something different on the other side of it. Because you are. That is not a motivational statement. That is a psychological fact. The nervous system is not fixed. It is adaptive. It learned the old patterns through experience, and it can learn new ones the same way, through new experiences, through new responses, through the consistent, repeated practice of meeting yourself differently than you were once met. This is called neurological reconditioning. The science is clear on this. The brain changes in response to repeated experience, and when you repeatedly respond to your own inner experience with presence and compassion, instead of avoidance and shame, the neural pathways that hold the old patterns begin to weaken, and new ones begin to form, not overnight, but steadily, undeniably, in the direction of the person you are actually capable of being, not the person the wound made you, the person who exists underneath the wound, who was always there, who never stopped being there, just buried under layers of protection that were built by a child who did not know any other way, and now you do. Now you have something that child never had. You have the capacity to reparent yourself, to give yourself what was missing, to become the safe, steady, compassionate presence inside your own life that you once looked for everywhere else. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Because when you become that for yourself, something remarkable begins to happen. The anxiety starts to soften. Not because your circumstances have changed, because the part of you generating the anxiety finally feels like someone is listening. Finally feels like it does not have to scream to be heard. Finally feels like it is no longer alone in the experience it has been carrying for so long. The people-pleasing begins to loosen, because you no longer need external approval to feel safe inside yourself. You are providing that safety. The self-sabotage begins to dissolve, because the subconscious no longer needs to pull you back from success to protect you from the vulnerability that comes with it. You have shown it, through your own consistent behavior toward yourself, that vulnerability is survivable. That being seen is survivable. That receiving good things is not something that will be taken away the moment you relax into it. This is the transformation that cannot be faked. The one that does not come from a new habit or a morning routine or a strategy. It comes from the inside, from a genuine shift in the way you relate to yourself, from the slow, profound, deeply personal work of going back for the part of you that was left behind and bringing it forward, into the life you are living now, into the relationships you are in now, into the version of yourself you are becoming right now, because that child deserves to come with you, not as a wound, not as a weight, but as a part of you that has finally been understood, finally been held, finally been told that it is safe now. That you are not in that environment anymore, that you are not that small and that powerless and that alone, that you have grown into someone who is capable of providing everything you once searched for outside yourself. Safety. Worth. Love that does not need to be earned. And as that truth settles into you, not as a concept but as a lived experience, something in you begins to breathe differently. Something releases. Something that has been braced for a very long time finally softens. And in that softness, in that quiet, in that space between the old story and the new one, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly, not motivation. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those. Wholeness. The feeling of being complete inside yourself, the feeling that you do not need to earn your place in your own life, that you do not need to perform your worth, that you do not need to brace against the next moment, that you are here, that you are enough, that you always were, even then, even in that house, in that confusion, in that silence that felt like rejection, in that love that felt like it had conditions. Even there you were always enough. The wound told you otherwise. But wounds are not the truth, they are just the conclusions of a child doing the best they could with what they had, and now you have more. Now you have awareness. Now you have compassion. Now you have the ability to look inward with steady eyes and say, I see what happened, I see what it taught me, and I am no longer willing to let it decide who I become. That is the moment everything changes, not the moment you fix yourself, because you were never broken. The moment you finally fully come home to yourself